Hello and welcome back to Craft Club. This week the theme and the story is Hansel and Gretel from my fabulous fairy tale collection. Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time there lived a poor woodcutter, his wife and two children named Hansel and Gretel. Though the woodcutter loved his children very much, his wicked wife wished them gone. There was a great famine throughout the land, and she did not want to share what little food they had with her two lousy stepchildren. One night, as the woodcutter worried over how he would feed his family, his wife told him, "Do not worry, husband, for I have found some work for the children and myself at a house on the other side of the forest. I will take the children tomorrow, and we will bring home a fine dinner." But Hansel, who lay awake in his bed, overheard this. He remembered the time that his stepmother had tried to sell him to a peddler in exchange for a new hat, and the time that she had tricked him into believing a nearby beehive was empty. He knew she was up to no good. So the next morning, before they set out, Hansel filled his pockets with small brown pebbles from the garden. As his stepmother led them through the forest, Hansel sprinkled a pebble here and a pebble there, creating a trail he could easily follow back home. After many miles, Hansel and Gretel's stepmother turned to them and said, "You poor children look thirsty. Wait here and I will fetch some water for you." And she disappeared into the woods. After some time, Hansel realised that he and his sister were stranded. Gretel began to cry, as little sisters often do. "Fear not," said Hansel, "I know the way." And they followed the path of pebbles home. Hansel and Gretel arrived to find their father beside himself with worry. "Your stepmother told me how you became separated. I thought you were lost forever," he cried, pulling them both into a fierce hug. Their stepmother, though really quite furious, pretended to be relieved. "We shall set out again tomorrow," she sighed, "but this time we will make sure everything goes to plan." The following morning, Hansel and Gretel's stepmother woke them very early. She handed them each a piece of bread as their breakfast and led them into the forest. Hansel, having had no time to collect pebbles, but certain of what his stepmother was planning, broke the bread into little pieces and left a trail of breadcrumbs on the ground as they walked. This time their stepmother led them into a deeper part of the forest. After a long time, Gretel's legs became tired from walking, so they all decided to rest by the trunk of a big tree. The children soon fell asleep. When they awoke, it was dark and their stepmother was gone. Hansel built a small fire to keep them warm and told Gretel he would lead them home in the morning. When daylight came, they set off along the path they had travelled the day before, but the breadcrumbs had disappeared. Hansel soon realised that the forest animals must have eaten them. "Oh, well, that was a stupid idea," he thought. They were totally and utterly lost. Gretel began to cry. At that moment they heard a sweet song coming from a nearby tree. Looking around in surprise, Gretel saw a snow-white bird sitting on a low branch and swallowed her tears to watch it. When the bird flitted out of the tree and into the forest, Gretel ran after it, and Hansel followed close behind. The beautiful bird led them to a clearing in the forest. Standing in the middle of the clearing was a beautiful cottage made from gingerbread and covered in sweets. It was the most exquisite thing Hansel and Gretel had ever seen. The children ran to the cottage and began taking bites from the gingerbread door, pulling off parts of the sweet-covered walls and licking the clear toffee windows. As they were eating, they heard a soft voice calling from inside the house. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" Suddenly the door opened and a very old woman came hobbling out. Hansel and Gretel were terribly frightened at first, but the old woman seemed very kind. "You poor children," she said, "you must be starving. Come inside and sit by the fire while I make you a hearty meal." She prepared dinner for Hansel and Gretel and set up 2 soft beds with thick, warm blankets. The children ate hungrily and then fell fast asleep. Little did Hansel and Gretel know that although the old woman had been kind to the children, she was actually a wicked witch who liked to eat little boys. The next morning, while he was still half asleep, the witch seized Hansel and forced him into a cage. "You will make a pretty mouthful," she cackled. In the following weeks, the witch cooked Hansel all the food he could eat and made Gretel her servant. Because she had had terrible eyesight, each morning the witch would make Hansel poke one finger out of the cage so that she could feel how he was fattening up. But Hansel, being the clever boy he was, had kept a chicken bone from one of his meals, and each day he would poke it out of the cage for the witch to feel. She could not understand why he wasn't becoming plump and juicy. One day, fed up with waiting for Hansel to fatten up into a delicious roast, the witch decided instead to make him into a lovely stew. She made Gretel fetch water and boil it in a big pot with lots of vegetables. The witch sat by cackling cheerfully and rubbing her hands together. While the stock for the stew was boiling away, the witch ordered Gretel to help her bake some bread. Gretel kneaded the dough, then gave the loaf to the witch, who leaned into the oven to place the bread inside. Gretel saw her chance. She quickly shoved the witch into the oven and slammed the door closed. "You saved my life," Hansel cried, very proud of his brave sister. Gretel quickly unlocked Hansel's cage and set him free. Quickly, Hansel and Gretel both found large sacks and ran around the house, filling them with as much food as they could carry. Gretel also took a large jar of tasty-looking rock candy. They set out into the woods again, determined to find their way home. After wandering through the woods for another day and night, Hansel finally began to recognise the forest around him. Though Gretel was exhausted, both children began to run when they saw the first glimpse of their home through the forest trees. Their father heard their hurried footsteps and came rushing out of the door, sweeping both children into his arms as soon as he saw them. "I've searched high and low for you," he cried. "When your stepmother told me she had lost you both, I was wild with worry. When she refused to help find you, I quickly realised her treachery and sent her away. We will never have to see her again." Inside the house, Hansel and Gretel emptied their sacks, and their father was relieved to see there would be enough food to get them through the coming winter. But when Gretel pulled out her jar of rock candy, her father exclaimed, for it turned out that this was not rock candy after all, but precious gems worth a great fortune. So they all lived happily ever after. But Hansel and Gretel never ate sweets again. Right, let's have a look. So I've got a colouring sheet, a colourful piece of paper, a pop-up little book, paper bag, a couple of pipe cleaners, another little book, some pieces of card, a straw, a spare glue stick, and a couple of labels. So I've provided you with a pop-up house book to decorate. but I'm also going to show you how you could make your own. There we go, and now all you need to do is decorate it. So here's one that I've decorated. It looks a bit like the gingerbread house in the story. And here's one that my daughter has beautifully decorated too. So these are the materials you will need to make a beautiful little handmade book like this one. I'm going to start with my 2 pieces of card and my piece of coloured paper, and I'm going to decide which side will be the cover of my book, and then I'm going to turn it over and stick the pieces of card on the back. Stick one down this side, leaving a good space around the edge. And then the second piece I'm going to stick down next to the first piece, but leaving a little finger space in between them. I'm then going to put some glue in all 4 corners and fold them right in, pressing it down nice and firm. Next I'm going to do the same with all 4 edges. So this is going to be the front cover of your book. Next I'm going to stick in the pages. And there already you have a little book, but to finish it off, I'm going to add a couple of labels. So I'm going to stick one on the front, and then one on the back, so you can then tie those strings in a little bow. To keep your book closed. So I'm going to show you how to make a little house a bit like the one Hansel and Gretel discovered in the story out of a paper bag. So I'm going to start by taking these paper clips off, and I'm going to be using those later. And inside the bag I've got 3 pieces of card, different colours. The biggest piece is going to be for the roof of the house, and with the other 2 pieces I'm going to cut out some windows and a door. Now I'm making sure I've got my paper bag round the right way with the opening at the top. I'm going to stick on the door and the windows. Like so. And I'm going to add just a little bit more decoration with my colouring pencils. There we go. And then I'm going to also add some decoration to my roof as well. So I'm going to first fold it in half like so, and then with a pencil I'm going to give it some tiles. Now I'm going to open up my paper bag and I'm going to use a couple of sheets of newspaper, but you could use, if you don't have any newspaper, you could use any scrap paper. And I'm going to crunch it out and pop it inside the bag so the bag holds its shape. Then finally I'm going to place the roof on top and hold it in position with the paper clips. There we go. For this activity you'll need your straw and your pipe cleaners. So here are all my creations. See you next time.